Hi, welcome to How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. In this podcast, we dive into compassionate leadership in today's fast-paced business environment. Where our experience and insights will help you lead with heart while securing your career. Join us for engaging conversations and practical advice to elevate your leadership skills and make a real difference. I'm your host, Roberto Torres, a seasoned startup engineering leader, alongside Chris Ollerkin, a Fortune 100 IT leader. Today, we're discussing what's needed to cultivate diversity and inclusion in leadership. Hey, Chris, how are you, man?
Hey, Roberto, I'm doing great. It's a sunny day. That always makes me happy. I hope you're having a sunny day too.
No, here is really rainy, but still I have a nice man within me.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, uh, this today is a difficult topic because regardless of the country where you live, where you work, uh, it's really important to print diversity in a workplace. But the problem, what I see, is that maybe not many companies, not maybe many persons have this willingness to print this into the culture of a company. And let's say maybe not the whole company, but a specific department you are. So, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I certainly think diversity is something we should all strive for, and it can begin with the humane leader trying to assess, what are their diversity goals, or how do they want to change how they've been leading. Let's say they weren't being diverse enough. So I think the first step really is to recognize, what are you trying to accomplish? Is it to have different perspectives so that the diversity is going to benefit the company, so you have different ideas? So is it a pipeline problem? I came from a company that's very old, 100 plus years in existence, gigantic. And I think for us, we look at things in a longer term view. And what frequently we tried to do is start the diversity path by recruiting at different universities, trying to recruit in different areas of the country, so that way the pipeline feeding the company was more diverse, versus, let's say, doing postings and trying to do it via a hire of senior managers or directors. It's much harder to start changing the culture if the pipeline feeding the company isn't already trying to be more diverse. So for us, I think starting at the pipeline level, start recruiting, getting interns, getting kids right out of college helps you start. But you can do both simultaneously, where you start to try and bring in leadership also.
Yes, I think one of the things also for a startup or any company is to take away the bias in your mind, no? To see, okay, we are in this company. Let's say to the other side of the spectrum. In this case, the startups. Usually, a startup, we begin a few number of people, two, three people, and we begin rising as the product, as our development goes up with the product. The thing is, uh, you have to be unbiased regarding your mind, because you should hire someone which to be really different from you, and that is the diversity. And I don't, and this could go besides gender. This could be go farther than a different mindset. This could be related to maybe you find someone which is amazing, which does has a lot of experience or could provide something very valuable. But if you see something that is different from you, and I mean, maybe they have piercing, maybe they have tattoos, and that's something visually. but maybe it's different gender, maybe has a different sexual orientation. I don't know, something like that. You have to take away that and focus on the value that person brings to either the company or the department. But I think that to acknowledge that it is, as you mentioned, to be a humane leader, to be a humane leader and say, okay, to first understand that we are all different. There's no clones of us, we are all different. So either if we say, okay, I require this person who does this, and I'm going to find it, don't take away the blinders, and be more open to different ideas, different people in the end.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're assembling a team and let's say you've got a different set of skills that you're trying to acquire, and some of it is very artistic. We need somebody doing our user interface that's going to have more artistic perspective on how to do it, little less technical, more user focused in how a common user would use it versus an engineer would use it. That's your criteria, not whether they can grow a beard or not grow a beard, whether they have an accent that's different than my accent. We, like you said, we are all unique. I don't consider that I have an accent, but to you, I have an accent, right? And so everyone has an accent because we grew up in a certain place. So I think if you can approach it with like, how am I assembling this team? What are the unique characteristics? Hey, I want some creative people, I want some very scientific, just the facts and just looks at performance, and think about what that criteria is. And that should help you screen your candidates and find candidates that are meeting your objective criteria, and not, based on whether they have piercings or they're male or female, or they're from Argentina versus Mexico versus the United States versus Canada versus England. Those things should not come into the criteria. Now, there could be some cultural things that could be a drawback. If they cannot speak English, maybe you can't hire them. Like, well, you're hiring me into a team in Mexico and everyone speaks Spanish and I don't. You know what? That's a check against me. But that's not discrimination. That's a skill set that I don't have. And it's okay. So sometimes in what people are doing for diversity, objectively look at it and say, are you really assessing this candidate based on skills? And if you're assessing, my skills, and you look at my degree background, the work I've done in the past, whether it's technical or managerial, hey, you're a great fit for our team, but everyone speaks, pick the language, Hindi, German, pick it, and I don't. Look, I met all the criteria except I don't speak the language of everybody else on the team. You have to rule me out. That's not discrimination. That's a skill set problem, and I don't have the skill set, so I shouldn't, be in that role.
Yeah, well, actually, if Spanish is mandatory, well, you're rolled out. But if it's not, you have to value. At the last startup that I was working, I began interviewing people from other countries um, that didn't talk Spanish. Why? Because what I required was someone to code, and I think it was in Python. So regardless of the language, I at that time we not I we began to change the culture by adding people who weren't Spanish speaking people. So that brought something. But regardless of that, and regardless of something else, because I just lost the thing that I was going to tell you. One thing that it's really important is to understand where are you in the company? Is it possible to change maybe a little bit of the culture of the company to have this inclusion or not? I'm not saying that this is a waste of time, but let's say that the culture of the company is adamant to not to change. Maybe in order to do the change, it has to be a generational change. Maybe you won't see the benefits of this change in the future because it could be maybe 5, 10 years, maybe 20 years. I don't know. But someone has to do something in order to provide diversity because in the end, diversity provides more value to everyone. Um,
Well, I want to make a point that you said, it can take a lot of time to change the culture. So you could go from, just making this up, a company that was 100% over 50 white males. The whole company somehow magically is 100%, 50 and over white males. You're not suddenly going to represent every possible group in that company in the next 5 years. The culture shock, just some of those cultural things take time. It's unfortunate, right? If it's discrimination that made the company that way, you're just not going to change that in a few weeks or a few months or with a few hires. And I think, to my point, to the pipeline, my own experience over 40 years of working is that unfortunately these changes, while positive, I completely agree with it, the diversity helps you look at problems in different ways. So it's very valuable, but it takes time. And I don't mean you have to be satisfied that in your generation, you're not going to see the change 30-year-old something person. I don't mean that the change can't be rapid in certain places, but just recognize that it is not something that changes overnight. And as a humane leader, you just have to continually try and chip away at that. And my own personal opinion is if you can start to develop the pipeline of talent, again, big company perspective, because it's a much longer term perspective, you got to start with the pipeline. Doesn't mean you can't hire some directors and vice presidents that are diverse, but if you get the pipeline going, it's going to occur no matter what if you get the pipeline going. If you change some of the senior leaders, but the pipeline is still discriminating, you're probably not going to change the company culture.
yeah, I understand. And let me tell you, with that example, let's say that every time you introduce or you implement a deploy a new application in which you have to be more tech savvy, maybe this in that example, all these persons which are male above 50 years old will have a higher learning curve than a younger age. And maybe that will affect the business, all this long time. So try maybe to hire the bracket of age of and regardless of the gender of people who could have this not higher, lower learning curve to implement it, and the business will thrive. And with that in mind, this could happen also because I lived it. I lived it when I was applying to startups. They said to me, no, Roberto, I'm sorry, you're above 50 years old. We only hire people which are beneath 35. So it has to break up these cultural traits that have been growing. Maybe that they've been hearing about it, but they haven't implemented. Regardless, in my case, it was age. So I think this is not a difficult situation. This is not an endeavor that has to go for every company, but it has to go with the value that you're going to receive today in the low term and the high term, and the biggest term to the company. So That should be. And for that, let me give you an example. Something that I had to confess that I'm ashamed. When I was 48 years old, I was working at a last mile logistics company. And the CEO and myself, because I was the CTO back then, we were hiring a COO position. And suddenly, this woman came. She was like 30-ish, and she was really good. Okay, she had a lot of great ideas. She had this driven gold mine. She was really, really good. But suddenly, she asked to the CEO, "Okay, how much? What is the salary range for this position?" And my CEO told her, what I pay to either woman or men are the same. And I was, what? I don't understand why we wouldn't have to pay the same for either a woman or a man. And she told me, because there is discrimination in gender, in this case in Mexico. I said, no way. Is this really? And both of them told me, yes, this has been going for ages. And I was ashamed because I didn't know, because I thought that everybody, because I even didn't think that there was this gender different, that you had to pay a different salary to either to a man or a woman. There are all the difference are only gender, but the skills, the achievement, accomplishments are the same. So I was really shocked. But my CEO, which was 4 years, no, 5 years older than me, he was 53 years old. He had this mindset: we're going to pay the same. So I think that in order to have a change, there has to be at least an idea put in place, you know?
Yeah. We don't, sometimes we don't realize what we are naive about, what we don't know about. Now, I'm a baby boomer, white male, STEM, right? I'm kind of like the target of all the diversity problems. I am that. And I would say I didn't realize until much later in life how much privilege that really gave me. So sometimes, it's just that we're naive. But once you recognize as a humane leader that sometimes you're not aware of the kinds of challenges that others are facing, that's the first step in becoming a humane leader and in helping everyone be successful, right? Is you got to recognize that one, maybe you don't know everything that's going on. Two, maybe you have some biases that you didn't realize. Look around all your coworkers. Hey, they're all baby boomer white males. That's probably not normal. Now, sometimes it's a pipeline problem, like I mentioned before. I mean, STEM, just in general, certainly in the United States, heavily dominated by white males, in the past. It's becoming less, a lot more diverse graduates now in STEM, but nowhere near enough to reflect the actual overall population, right? In terms of how many women versus men, how many purple people versus green people, etc. But it's improving, and that's kind of my point of, you can't necessarily just say I'm going to make everything fair immediately. You also have to have the pipeline to successfully run your business, because if you say, well, look, I'm going to hire 50% purple people, great, but there's only 10 purple people out there, and you hire all 10, and you're not going to be 50-50 purple people then, because there just aren't enough candidates. And maybe some of those candidates are not really qualified for the role you're hiring for. So it is quite a challenge to be a humane leader if you set some objectives that are unachievable in diversity. I always find that if you set, it's great to set a stretch goal as a humane leader and really strive for it. That's all great. But if you set a stretch goal that is completely statistically unachievable, you're always going to feel like a failure. And I don't believe that that's necessarily the right way to set your goals either. you know.
Yes, yes. Uh, this is something that, regardless of age, regardless of your mindset, we have to be um, open to change. People are afraid of change, and because of that, we won't act. We have this maybe this mindset that could have been created by us, or maybe by someone else, because we grab those thoughts, that mindset, and put it on to us. I think we try to change. Let me tell you, I have a couple of engineering positions right now, and only 11% of the applicants were women. And I really put on the job description that we don't discriminate because of anything, not age, not gender, not anything. So what I was looking for or aiming for was to have more women, to have more people above 40 years old. None of the applicants were above 40 years old. And something that will provide more, yes, more value to the company, but the opportunity is there. I'm open to that because, I was hired at 53 years old right now. So this starts. So I'm really developing my experience, but I'm open to find someone who will fit. If you have the hard skills and you have the soft skills, I don't care uh, uh, what what traits do you have besides that. I'm
Right.
really
But
open
if
to
the
that.
pool of candidates truly is so small for this more diverse area, it is going to be a struggle. And I salute you for trying, but I think, from a bigger company perspective, statistically, it works better in our favor, right? Because where you're hiring an engineer, we might be hiring 50 engineers. So we could, of that 50, get, if the working STEM population of the diversity pool you're looking for is to get 10% of those, well, if you're hiring 50 positions, if you get 5, you might get, some of those people. I think you have to really judge yourself against what's the available pool of candidates in the area where you're hiring and what's truly available. And until we get more people in STEM that are diverse from, again, that beginning pipeline, we're going to struggle. But as the humane leader, it's important that you try, right? And you try and do that, and hopefully you can move along that path to get your teams to be more diverse. But I also thought about one thing for candidates who are in the minority pools and they're struggling to find a job. Recognize that there are humane leaders out there. Read the postings closely for things where they're offering roles like you did, where you specifically call out, we're very open to diverse languages, cultures, etc. So make sure you're applying for those kinds of jobs if you've been discriminated against. And I think, proving a case of discrimination is pretty hard. Now, I'm not saying, hey, if you were a job applicant and you were discriminated against, file a complaint, sue, whatever. But I personally, even though I've also been discriminated against, and I was told not to apply for roles because they weren't going to hire white males. Look, it stinks, but I did not. I knew I would never be able to prove it. Right? It was all verbal. Told not to apply because you won't get interviewed. Don't even bother. So. But could I prove it in court and get a judgment and get money for it? No, of course not. So discrimination is bad. It shouldn't happen. But I'd also, urge the audience to say, look, pick your battles and decide whether it's worth your time trying to go after a company that discriminated against you versus finding a good company that's hiring diverse, who will likely be more successful than the bad company that wouldn't hire you. So the bad company eventually, karma, eventually economics will work against them. So try and move forward and look for opportunities that support that diversity that you represent.
Indeed, indeed, I totally agree with you. And don't waste time where there is no disposition to hire. Focus on the companies that they are. Um, Before we do the wrap up, let me tell you, I live in Mexico City. Here we have 8 million people. The suburbs we have, well, Estado de Mexico has 14 million people. This is a 22 million people huge city. And I think that I should find someone, because I'm really open to that they didn't apply, that maybe people are afraid of maybe all the rejections, But in the end, if someone is listening to this podcast from Mexico City, I'm hired to engineers.
Absolutely. Self-promotion's not a problem. Put the job sign up there. Put the sign up, put the placard up on the post.
Well, well, okay. With this, I think it was a good topic. We could talk about this for many hours more, but I think we'll close it and maybe we'll talk about this in a further podcast.
Absolutely.
Great. Well, thanks for joining us on another episode of How to Be a Humane Leader Without Losing Your Job. We hope our insights help you become a smarter and more strategic leader. Apply today's lesson to see the positive impact on your team and career. Catch all our episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Anchor, and YouTube. Join us next week as we discuss something trendy in the leadership world. Until then, stay humane and stay successful. Bye-bye, Chris.
See you later, Roberto.